This podcast discusses themes of mental health, which some people may find emotive, such as suicide or other adult-themed content. The information contained in this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. All views expressed are solely those of individuals involved and do not represent the opinions of any entity whatsoever with which we have been, are now, or will be affiliated. The information is not meant to diagnose or treat any mental health condition. If you're experiencing mental health symptoms, we encourage you to contact a mental health service within your community. If you're experiencing a mental health emergency, please seek the relevant support and interventions by presenting to your local accident and emergency department or contacting the relevant emergency services.
You're listening to the Men's Mental Health Podcast, The Man Hug.
Welcome to The Man Hug, the monthly men's mental health podcast. I'm Dean McShane.
I'm Dan Cooper. I'm Ian Pearce-Hayes.
And I'm Conleth Kelly.
Each month we will discuss a different topic related to men's mental health, which will include a guest speaker who will discuss their own personal story. And each month we will also be showcasing an organisation or charity within the Merseyside area who work within mental health to help build your signposting skills. Hello and welcome to this month's Man Hug podcast. This month we are exploring the theme of sexuality and mental health, and we're really honoured to have two wonderful guests. On today's Man Hug, we are joined by broadcaster, journalist and entertainer Pete Price, and later on we will be joined by Chris Porter, who is the Wellbeing Service Team Lead at YPAS, which is the Young Persons Advisory Service here in Liverpool, who run some fantastic LGBTQ plus young person support groups, so he will be with us later to tell us more about what they do. Well, first up, a huge welcome to Pete Price. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Man Hug.
I tell you what, before we even start, I'll say to you, I wish when you asked me about my story, I wish that we had have had support. Yeah. Because there was no support. Yeah. I'll leave it at that. Yeah. When you said that, I just went goose pimply, just thinking, if only. So I'm going to get upset in this interview. Yeah. But if only I'd have had support, it would have been a different world.
And I think that's really important as to why this podcast is so important and what we thought would be full circle, really, of, you know, your experience and then what thankfully is available for young people today who are experiencing as well. So,
because the thing is, like, you know, we met before just by past meeting, just by chance, and it was to do with I've used your documentary. Within teaching sessions, things like that, whatever, for the students actually show this awareness. Because a lot of them think, oh, that was in the past. But, like, you know, we'll probably come across this about, you know, present, potential future issues with regards to it. But can you tell us a little bit about the Witness, the BBC documentary that you actually did?
Yeah, well, it's the story rather than the documentary I want to talk about, because I'm now a 77-year-old man, and my sexuality I questioned from the age of 10 to the age of about 12. At the age of 12, I don't know where I got the strength from, but I went to the doctors, Dr. Lansley, who is no longer with us, and said that I think I'm a homosexual, because, of course, the word gay did not exist. And he laughed at me. He actually laughed at me and said, it's adolescent, you'll grow out of it. I went back at the age of 14 after being in turmoil within myself and having no one to talk about. Because you couldn't say you're a homosexual. Because once you said it, it's out there forever and ever and ever. So I went back to him, and the doctor, bless him, prescribed me Valium.
Right.
Thank goodness. At the age of 14, I put them down the toilet. Otherwise, I don't think I'd been here today. I think I'd have been a drug addict. From the age of 14 to about 18, I lived my life as an outrageous person, and that's the way I cope with my sexuality. And because I then went into show business, my mum always thought I was eccentric. I'm adopted, so I never wanted to hurt my mother because she gave me the greatest chance in life. So I was given away. My first mother, my birth mother, was in the RAF. They could have a child at Wrexham. There was a big place there. You had the child, went back. Nobody knew you'd had a baby. And then you went back to the armed forces. But that's a whole other story.
Yeah.
So my mum, Hilda May Price, brought me up and was the love of my life. And I never wanted to hurt her because I felt I let her down. And at the age of, I'm not very good on years, so I'm not too sure, but 18 to 19, I was working in a nightclub called the Cabin Club at the top of Wood Street. And I was a chef, then became an entertainer. That's where it all happened for me. And they were very understanding. Brian and Ian and Mrs. Windsor were the three owners. And they allowed me time off to go to London. So I would go down to London and be myself, away from everybody. But I couldn't find gay clubs. I didn't know where they were or what to do. But I felt comfortable. But I remember first time ever, it was about 12 and 6 in old money for the return ticket. That's how long ago it was. And I remember taking my overcoat off, which was very classy, putting it on my shoulders, smoking with a cigarette holder and mincing down Euston Station. But that was me.
Yeah.
That was where I could be me. Anyway, there was a letter, stupid letter, "Dear David, if you marry Peter, I'll kill myself." It was one of those mental letters. And I kept it. Why, I don't know. My mother was a very private person. I was a private person. She found the letter. It was hidden away and it had fallen out. She didn't go rooting for it because she was very naive sexually in every way. So she would never have understood. And I came home on Thursday night. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. My mother looked like she'd died. She was in bed holding the letter. She said, "What does this mean?" And I said, "It means I'm a homosexual," to which she promptly vomited everywhere and had a breakdown. She told me to get out. She apologised 5 minutes later for saying that because it was alien to her completely, as sex was alien to her because she couldn't have children, so it was alien. And then the very long story, eventually I spoke to her about it and we went back to the doctors and the doctors said, "He can be cured. There is a treatment." So that's it, up to the cure. So that's the pain I lived through.
Yeah.
But the fear, for instance, I'll give you an example. The Magic Clock was the gay bar that everybody went to in Liverpool, opposite the Royal Court. No longer there now, it's the bus depot, the bus station. But we guarded each other. We looked after each other because if anybody came out the theatre and saw you in the gay bar, you were dead. Because the queer bashers were out, the blackmailers were out. Yeah. It was a horrendous time to live in. And we were a community, and I'll say right now to every young person listening, never disrespect an older gay man or a gay woman because we set the bar for you. And there's a lot of ageism within the gay community. That's by the side. So that was the world I was living in. And then I was going for the cure.
Right, because whenever the documentary itself, like, the witness program, whenever I actually showed it to students, I think a lot of them some of them actually did think, "Oh, this isn't right showing us this." And I go, "Yeah, but this is what it used to be. This was seen as normal in a way, like, going for this." And I think for you, this is me personally, the love you have for your mum, you went, "I'm going to go for this." Did you know what you were, this sounds terrible, I'm going to say, do you know what you were letting yourself in for?
No, never in a trillion years.
Yeah.
And I never told my mother. I never told my mother because I didn't, when I tell you about it, I didn't finish the course. And if she knew I didn't finish the course and she, in a way, never forgave me. But if I'd have told her what they did, I think she would have tried and kill herself. It was that bad. It's amazing that when it happened, there was a Dark Secrets was the first program ever done by the BBC. I think it was BBC Two, and it was me and two other people who lived through aversion therapy. By the way, it's aversion therapy, not conversion therapy. They are two different therapies. You've got a fighting chance with conversion therapy. With aversion therapy, you haven't at all. So the big day came and I went. So what they did was I got a lift. Nobody knew I was going to a mental home, a loony bin, because that's what they were called in those days. and it was by Chester Zoo. And it's now West Cheshire Hospitals, and it is still the big building, but we were in the missing huts. And when I arrived, they first of all signed me in, but under a different name, so nobody in the world knew I was there.
Right.
So because they couldn't put me into a mental institute for being illegal, because I was illegal, because people forget it was a criminal offence.
Yeah.
You could get 10 years in prison for buggery. You could get arrested for kissing somebody in the street and go to prison for 2 years. Nobody has any idea, who didn't live through it, what it was like. So we got to Chester, to the mental home. They put me in under a different name, and for 2 days I mixed with basket cases, with people who had real health problems. And I'm not being politically correct in any of this interview over the words, because that was the day it was. I remember lying in bed, scared out of my wits, when the person was around my bed, whispering in my ear, and then pissed on me at the end of the bed. And that's what they put me in, a normal 18 to 19-year-old who was coming in to be cured of being a homosexual. So that was the basis of what was happening. And I met a girl, stayed with me forever. She was about 29. She'd been in there for 9 years into this interdiva. That's what it was called. Interdiva, for having a baby out of wedlock. That's what we were dealing with. And I straight away wasn't even thinking about the treatment. All I was thinking about was, I'm not going to get out of here alive, and nobody knows I'm in, because I'm under a different name. And that was the build-up to the treatment.
Right, okay. And the treatment itself, I know there's different ways of actually the so-called treatment, the cure and things like that. I actually liked what you actually said about the aversion, conversion, things like that, whatever. I've actually been researching this, and one word that came up for me was repatriation therapy. And I just thought, what is that, whatever. But that's another point. But with the therapy itself, can you? I really hate dragging this up. Like, you know,
No.
tell people?
I'm here to tell people, because I want people to understand.
Please tell people what you went through, please.
And by the way, there's a dreadful end to this story. A dreadful end to this story.
Sadly, I know.
Yeah.
You know.
So there was I'm in the office with the psychiatrist, and there's a Grundy TK20. I always remember the old-fashioned, for all you people out there, that's an old-fashioned tape recorder, and I've still got one under my bed at home. Not a Grundy, but I've got one. So there's a Grundy, and this psychiatrist interviewed me for an hour, and we talked about every sexual act. But he put it in gross terms. So he was trying to make me feel bad about talking about oral sex and anal sex and everything to do with sex. And lots of things he talked about I didn't even know about, because I was still naive. I was still learning who I was going to be. But I wasn't being negative, except for the fear of not getting out alive. So we had the hour tape. So they then put me in a room with no windows, only a small room, in a bed. And there was a stack of dirty books. Guys in bathing costumes. I mean, now looking back, it made me laugh. There's no way any of them turned me on anyway. It was just ridiculous. So there's the books. I'm in the bed. In red pajamas, took a pair of red pajamas with me. A nurse over to my right-hand side who just sat there and didn't speak to me, just sat there. And they asked me what I drank, and I drank Guinness at the time. So there was cases of Guinness. So they're giving me glasses of Guinness, looking at the dirty books and listening to the tape. And that lasts an hour. So that is the therapy. So we have an hour of the dirty books, drinking the Guinness, the nurse sitting there not speaking, me listening to the gross conversation. That was it. halfway through the hour, I was injected with something that I knew what it was, but I've wiped it out of my mind now because I never want to hear the word again. And that was halfway through the hour, which made me feel violently ill, both ends.
Yeah.
To which I said, please, can I go to the bathroom? Because I don't feel very well. And then the nurse spoke for the first time and said, no, just do it in the bed. So I was lying in my own excrement, my own vomit, feeling very, very sad and very alone and very scared. And that was the hour. So it was the books, the drink, the conversation, the injection, and that lasted an hour. And then another hour. And another hour. And after 72 hours of no sleep, nothing left to bring up either end. I'd had no food. I was being tortured. And what was going through my mind, I can never tell you. What wasn't going through my mind is that I'm being offended by men in bathing costumes. I just wanted to get out. I thought I wasn't going to live through this experience. Excuse me. I sent for the psychiatrist, who didn't come and see me, by the way. The nurse liaised between him. And he was very, very aggressive with me. What's wrong? I said, I want out. I volunteered, because I volunteered this. I wasn't forced to go in. I volunteered. I want out. And he said, but we've got another 2 days of this. And then we're going to put the electrodes on your penis. I said, if you put electrodes on my penis, what's the point of that? He said, well, if you get an erection over men being naked. I went, if you think that I could even think sexually with this vomit and excrement all over me and the stench in this room, I cannot explain what the room was like. And also, and please ask me again about the nurse if I forget, because I must tell you about the nurse. So it was dreadful. I forced him to let me out. I forced him to let me out. I don't know where I got the strength from. I'm not a violent person. I wasn't aggressive, but I needed out. And he was really angry. And I honestly didn't think I was going to get out. I rang a mate of mine up, who sadly is no longer with us. He picked me up. My mother was away for a few days. I went home and I couldn't speak to him. He didn't even know what it was about. I lay in the bath for about 8 hours, trying to scrub the filth off me. My mother came home. She said, what are you doing here? And I said, I can't stay there. And she was very, very sad. She wasn't angry. She was sad. But if she'd have known what they'd have done to me, as I said before, she would have probably killed herself. The end of that story is 2 days later, I accepted who I was, but never told anybody the story. And there was a wonderful club in Manchester called the Rocking Gum. And this is how long ago it was. You weren't allowed to dance together. You were allowed a waltz at the end. 2 men were allowed to waltz together. But the boss would walk round to make sure you're not too near in case the police were in. That's the world we lived in. That's the world we lived in. I'm a non-violent person, but I attacked somebody at the bar. And I wanted to kill them. I don't know how they got me off him. I don't know how they stopped me. The 2 doormen just pulled me to one side. And when I told them what had happened and who he was, the doorman gave him a slap outside. He was the psychiatrist. So the man that tortured me, the man I still believe to this day was getting his rocks off watching a young 18, 19-year-old going through this. And that was the day I said, enough is enough. And I never, ever, ever talked about it. And the only reason years later I talked about it was because there was 5 soldiers, I think it was 2 men and 3 women, at the Court of Human Rights trying to be allowed to be still in the forces. And they won their case, which is incredible. But I remember one of them saying, I even went for aversion therapy. And it knocked me physically sick. I went and threw up in the bathroom because I said it can't be happening still. It can't be happening all these years later. I went to a pal of mine who worked for The Independent. He laughed at me at the beginning And then he started to investigate, and doors were closed everywhere. Nobody. And then a 2-page article came out in the Independent, and then the rest is history. So that is it in a nutshell. Let me go back to the nurse. So the nurse, who was a good-looking lad, actually, because I remember at the beginning, it was a haze to me afterwards. I was walking through Liverpool years later, and a lovely man called Roger, and I've written about this in my column in the Echo, it's out there to see, came up to me, beautifully spoken man, and works in the church, and said, I was a male nurse in those days. It wasn't the same male nurse with me, but he was there. But he told me, first of all, he cried and apologised. And then it put another leg to the story. And the other leg is that most of those male nurses were gay. So they sat there watching me, but they couldn't say anything because they would be put there. And Roger was one of those male nurses and has apologised. And we're now friends. And never, ever, every time he sees me, still says sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm dumbfounded by it, blown away. But, it was that per chance meeting where I saw you having your coffee out in the street, and I came up to you. I think you probably were going to think, oh, he's going to say something about a lizard, which we'll mention later.
I did, yeah.
And this is it. I'm thinking, well, I'll bring it up with a sec, whatever. However,
we should finish with that on a lighter note.
No, I will. But what I do want to say is the fact that I thanked you for what you have done, for actually going out there and helping people, telling people your story. And I'm getting choked up by this, whatever. But it was such appreciation for so many people actually out there. And the thing is, it's still going on.
Without any shadow of a doubt. And by the way, homophobia is alive and well.
Oh, totally.
And many countries in the world where it's still banned. And by the way, something else, and I've not talked about this publicly, I've mentioned it a couple of times on my show, but somebody who helped me through these times was April Ashley, the first ever sex change, one of the most magnificent women on God's earth, who sadly has passed away. And she had a restaurant in London called April and Desmond's 8 near Harrods. And she knew me from Liverpool and got me through some real bad times, and I could ring her when I was struggling. And I saw her recently and interviewed her when they had the exhibition at the Liverpool Museum for her. Sadly, she's now died. But I went up to her straight away, and she went, Peter Price, you're still here.
That's a really important point, because when you were younger, you felt that you couldn't tell anybody or talk to anyone. And what we reiterate in all these podcasts is that having somebody to talk to, somebody to offload to. And in the last podcast, it wouldn't work for Alan to speak to counsellors, but he had a support network around him. And obviously your relationship.
But you saying that was really interesting, because what people don't know, I've got a friend about 10 years ago who is gay and never came out. And everyone said, but it's not anyone's place to tell anyone, because once you say it, it's out there forever and ever. Amen. So it's their choice. I will say, and this is controversial, and people will not agree with me, and this is an interesting point, but I'll say it. 50 years on radio, I have told everybody my story. I will help anyone, but I say quite publicly to any gay footballer, do not come out. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy, the vileness that they're going to face. Sorry, and I know a lot of people listening will not agree with that at all.
Well, that's interesting. I've written down last night talking about working in the media, and obviously being around lots of people from the music industry and famous people. And how would you feel that the media has adapted over your time working in media, from like the 70s, where people like Freddie Mercury were demonised in the press for who they were, and then a little bit later, footballer Justin Fashanu, who obviously was the first openly gay footballer, and the media attention that he received, which then led to his eventual downfall and death. Do you feel things have changed in the media, being somebody who's worked in the media for so long?
I thought they had changed until right now with what's going on with Russell. Philip Schofield, the newsreader. I thought everything had changed. But no, I think we're living in a world now because everybody can self-judge on social media. And I think it's sad. Now, I work as a comic as well. I've been a comic for 50 years alongside being a broadcaster. Me, Larry Grayson, and Danny LaRue used to get heckled outside the theatre by gay people saying we weren't doing the gay people any favours. Oh, yes, we were. I was on stage as a gay comic laughing at myself, saying, hey, I'm no different to any of you. So how dare they outside, march outside. I'll never forget that. I coped with it. Larry Grayson didn't cope with it at all. And we were the forefront to make people understand, that we're human like everybody else.
Because it's also, you just said about sports and things like that with people, because for me, I'll just slip it in here, Ireland beating South Africa in the Rugby World Cup, but we'll move on from there. But one of the famous, brilliant referees, Nigel Owens, so respected throughout the world by all rugby players and rugby fans alike, whatever, he was on Desert Line Discs and he actually says, I don't want to be gay. It was this, I want rid of this thing. So he actually went to the doctor to be chemically castrated because he wanted to get rid of this thing, this disease, this process. And he did. He actually tried to commit suicide. He tried to kill himself. And I've got a quote here. And it's kind of it maybe touches on yourself as well. He says, it was only when my mum came to see me in hospital when I tried to take my own life. And she told me, if you try to do anything like this again, then take me and your dad with you because we don't want to live our lives without you. And to me, whenever I read that, I was just thinking, bloody hell, unbelievable. And whenever you see people like this, whenever you see other rugby players like Gareth Thomas, there was a fellow over in Ireland, hurling is a sport we play over in Ireland, there's Danilo Cusack. He wrote a book like, Come What May. And I know a lot of sports people who have come out, have read this book, who quote this book. And what he had, and a lot of them had, they had that support, they had that people around you. So, and I do like what you actually said there, how you had your community and they were there for you, but there was still this, taking this leap forward, this kind of thing. And I just want to thank you so much for your bravery and your courage. Seriously, so much,
It has been amazing to hear, it's such an emotional subject, and I want to thank you as well, and I did my nurse training many, many years ago back in Chester, so the diva was something as students that we learnt an awful lot about, and being, a young student, no one believed the books that we used to read, like you said, someone's in there because they had a child out of wedlock, or someone's in there because they've got Down syndrome, or the list of things for why people were in there, and homosexuality was one. I remember reading and almost tearing up, thinking I've got relatives who were openly homosexual, and if I knew that would happen to them, then I got really angry about it, and to your story, Pete, thank you so much, it's absolutely incredible.
Thank you.
And
on to the lizard question, I guess.
So, the thing is, I will say about the lizard question, you lot don't know this. I spoke to Pete on the phone. He says, Daddy, whatever. He says, and I'll talk about the lizard. And I was just like, Pete, my daughter sent this to me about Pete Price the lizard. I was going, what the hell are you on about? So do you mind telling people?
Well, to finish off, if it's still left in the edit, to finish off, it's the most amazing true story. And I lecture at universities and talk about show business. And I did a lecture at one university and walked in and there was 600 students and I'm sitting there and I'm starting to talk and I went, stop, whoa. Right, let's get this out of the way. I'm not a lizard. And they all screamed with laughter. Then I got on with what I was doing. On radio, 50 years. On radio, 27 awards. Got to throw that in. And a boy came on and said, why won't you have David Icke on your show? David Icke was, for those people that don't know, a very famous sports commentator who became the son of God in his eyes and destroyed his career and now is one of the biggest conspiracy theorists in the world. And I have interviewed him since. But he always said that the royal family and the Rothschilds, who own the banks, apparently, are shape-shifting lizards. So this 14-year-old boy came on my show and said, why won't you have David Icke on your show? And I said, he won't come on the show. And he said, because you're a shape-shifting lizard. That was it. 3 minutes. A 3-minute call is now famous worldwide because a young man thought it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. He was a WWE wrestling fan. He wrote a poster out, Pete Price is a Lizard, and got Hulk Hogan to hold it. Hulk Hogan then got 2 million views and hadn't a clue what the poster was about. And then from that, it exploded around the world. And just recently, there has been a documentary made. They were with us for 3 years, and it's Pete Price, the Lizard of Liverpool, and it had its premiere at Fact, and it's hysterical. Yeah. It's not out there for people to see. It's going to be eventually, but they're using it for festivals. But it is the most bizarre thing. And the sad thing is, to finish off, I've been 50 years in the business. I've had albums, I've had TV series, I've worked with some of the greatest stars, I have had everything, and I've had the most amazing radio career. And I'm only going to be remembered as a lizard.
Nah, you won't. Definitely not.
We can thank Hulk Hogan for that.
Yeah. Listen, if Hulk Hogan came into this room and yourself here, I think the applause would go to you.
Yeah, definitely.
Don't you worry about it. All right?
But as Conleth just said, I think one of the things that hopefully you will be remembered for is your bravery and your openly and honestly, and the things that it will change and has changed. So once again, thank you so much for coming onto the Man Hug. We massively appreciate it, Pete.
Pleasure.
Thank you. You're listening to the Men's Mental Health Podcast, The Man Hug.
Okay, it's this section of the podcast where we talk about our current theme as your host. So we are all going to talk about little different angles to do with sexuality and men's mental health in this. I just wanted to bring up a really interesting thing that happened to us a couple of years ago at the Royal College of Nursing Congress. So for those that don't know, it's the annual meeting for 4 days where all nurses across the country get together and we'll debate hot topics, and a lot of it leads to lobbying the government. And one of the most moving sessions I've ever been in was when, I'll just quickly read out what it actually said in the actual programme, that this meeting of RCN Congress calls on RCN Council to campaign for a ban on conversion therapy across all 4 countries of the UK. Now, what happens when things like this happen at Congress is someone will get up and they will talk about why we should be lobbying the government or making these changes, and then everyone will vote on this. Overwhelmingly, members condemned conversion therapy, calling for an inclusive ban which includes all LGBTQ plus people across the UK. One of the things that was so moving was that many nurses were getting up who may be transgender themselves, maybe lesbian, gay or bi, and they were getting up and they were telling their own, and in many cases, horrific stories of conversion therapy, and some dated as well to do with aversion therapy, such as what Pete was discussing. It was such an emotive subject. I looked around the hall and most people were in tears listening to some of the barbaric and absolutely appalling things that had happened to a lot of our fellow nurses. And we thought, leaving that hall, that'll be it now. There's however many thousand nurses calling for this to actually be actioned. And I thought I'll just do a little check and see where we're up to with that now. And we've had quite a few prime ministers since then as well. So it's sat on a lot of desks, not doing too much. So I had a little look today on where we're up to, and apparently this is the latest news on it. So the Tory government's reportedly set to backtrack once again on banning conversion therapy after years of failed attempts and unkept promises. So it's been 5 years since Theresa May first promised to bring forward legislation banning conversion therapy. But since then, every Prime Minister's vowed to ban the practice. They've all failed to enact a full and meaningful policy. Now, the latest is, it's been reported that Rishi Sunak is set to follow in their footsteps as his government prepares to abandon a ban on conversion therapy for LGBTQ plus people. So according to the report in the Times, the government will announce the legislation banning conversion therapy is no longer on the table as ministers thought such protections were problematic or ineffective in other countries. When you look at other countries where this has actually worked, Would anyone like to have a guess which European country was one of the first?
No, it's not a country. No, Madrid's up there.
Yeah, I was quite shocked by this, but it's the lovely little island of Malta.
I was going to say Malta.
So remember that one for your pub quiz. Yeah. So Malta was named the best European country for LGBTQ plus rights by various advocacy groups in both 2015 and 2023, because in 2016 it passed a law dictating that anyone who tries to change, repress or eliminate a person's sexual orientation, gender identity and or gender expression will be fined or even jailed. I mean, that's incredible, isn't it? Yeah. Fines can reach up to €10,000 and possible jail time as well. So obviously this, barbaric practice of conversion therapy, it tragically occurs across the globe. It's still legal for LGBTQ plus people to be subjected to conversion therapy in the UK. However, there's been growing consensus to ban the practice. So that's where we're up to in terms of an update, and I thought it'd just be quite important to put that out there because it needs to stay on people's agenda. You need to write to your local MPs and especially, we've got Chris coming in next from YPAS, and there's so many of these young LGBT groups now popping up across the UK, and activism is so important. We've seen such amazing changes within LGBTQ plus, especially when it comes to law and legislation and pride. But this is something that still needs fighting, really. And I think it is a lot of the young people's activism that will actually finally make these changes to our government.
Yeah, spot on. Totally agree with that. And what you actually say, it's these politicised ways, where we have to actually look at these things and looking at across the world, and maybe not just within Cheshire Merseyside or the UK, because I know Brazil, I think they're another country that actually really pushed for this, and they're very, very good with the issues there. One, some of the research I've actually put up, we was looking at some of the right-wing religious groups with regarding these things and the pressures actually put on them, what they actually put on people. And as I mentioned there with Pete, we've talked about conversion, aversion therapy, and, according to Pete, there's difference. But this word I got, repatriative therapy, bring you back into normal society, which I just thought was a terrible word to actually have with it. But some of the common reasons wherever it comes to maybe going through this so-called therapy is the common reasons where actually people may actually seek it is there's a perceived incompatibility between someone's religious values and their sexual orientation or actually gender identity. A desire to belong or feel normal within a community. We touched across that, touched that with, as I mentioned there, as Pete mentioned earlier, whenever I brought up about the rugby player Nigel Owens, I don't want this, I want to be normal. It's around these things. And also external pressure or coercion by someone's family member or people of their actual community, possibly their faith community. And it's just actually thinking the UK, I think it was 2018, the UK actually looking to ban conversion therapy in 2018, and we're still within this actual area now with regards to it. Of course, me, you know what I'm like. I know our Ian loves a bit of statistics, so I shall actually talk a little bit around here. The Government Equality Office, they actually did a study with regards to a questionnaire, and it went out to nearly 33,000 people. Now, I will admit the majority of these were actually from the southeast of England. So, you look at those connections where we actually maybe have, like Pete Price actually said, he went down to London, he could be himself, down those things. And I know this actually happened to a lot of people. But they actually looked at within this area, and what actually surprised me was 5% of the respondents have actually been offered this therapy. And that's actually looking about, 1,600 people have actually been approached thinking about this, going through these things. And whenever you actually look at it, who can actually conducted, who actually approached them with regards to it, there were people from the community, an individual from organisations, parent, guardians, family members, healthcare providers, or medical professionals. That was 19% of the what they actually came through, and a lot of it was actually sometimes faith organisation or groups. So. We sometimes, some people may be shocked that, this is actually going on, but it is. You look at, and, we do think of worldwide, but we also think of our own country itself here, where these things are actually, it's still there, it's still pushing forward with regards to this. So Over to Orion.
Just following on from what Dean has outlined there, I think the key thing in terms of politics, what do the government actually state? If you go into gov.uk in October 2021, so nearly 2 years ago, they actually said the UK government is committed to exploring legislative and non-legislative options for ending so-called conversion therapy. They conclude that there's evidence that conversion therapy can be harmful. Dean has nicely articulated the broken promises from Theresa May in 2018, repeated by Boris Johnson. Rishi Sunak, the latest incumbent, has actually said no one in this country should be harmed or harassed for who they are, and so-called conversion therapy is abhorrent. And yet he says he should leave it to the leader of the House to set out the legislative changes. And now Penny Mordaunt, who is that person, the leader of the Commons, has actually said that we've actually run out of time. So those promises will not be taken. Worse, Suella Braverman, who's their Home Secretary, has actually yesterday in Washington, where she was actually briefing a select group, I suppose, or privileged group, she's actually said, she was talking about the 1951 Refugee Convention, and she actually said that should be torn up. And this is what she said, and I put a direct quote, so this isn't from myself. Being gay or a woman must not be seen as a reason to gain asylum, even if being a woman or gay means you are under threat. So I guess listening to Pete's experiences of actually being homosexual, about being gay and what he went through, and yet we're still not, there still isn't that political will for the government to actually make those changes. So for me, it's important that, our next guest, in terms of the services, the attitudes must change in terms of actually challenging that. And for me, what does give me that sense of hope is if you look at the 40th year of the British Society of Attitudes survey, which is, they look at about 3,000 people, what it's like to live in Britain. They've done it since 1983. It's in its 40th year. What they found in 1983, when they spoke to over 50% of their respondents, they said in 1983, same-sex relationships were always wrong. Yet last year, just 9% agreed. And I think that those attitudes have changed in those 40 years because people, like Pete have challenged and continue to challenge, and it shows with the government that we have and those same ideas that we've still got to challenge to actually change and make sure that those ideas change and we change the world around in which those ideas take place. And I think the whole wealth of LGBTQ plus all of that campaigning that's been around that has really led to those changes. One last thing that I'd like to say is that in terms of a resource, there's a book by Gerard Conley about A Boy Erased, a memoir of identity, faith and family. It came out in 2016, and it's autobiographical story of Gerard Conley was a son of a Baptist pastor. He was involved in church life in a small town. It's set in America. And he was similar to Pete. He was challenged and terrified, really, about his, about that sexuality. And that Boy Erased, I just think, goes to the heart of what that means about who we are as human beings and about that identity that we have when we're so young, when we're thinking about all those things about who we are, and sexuality is part of that. The book is a real gripping read, and it had me in tears reading it. But the film is also, which came out in 2018, it's a big blockbuster, but it really conveys a lot of what's in the book. It stars Lucas Hedges is the fictional Gerard Conley, but also stars Nicole Kidman as his mum, Russell Crowe as his father, the Baptist preacher, who's also a car salesman as well, which is quite interesting. But it's such a beautiful, raw, and really compassionate memoir about that identity, about love, about understanding, about who we are as people, as human beings. And I just think it's a really powerful, both book and film, in terms of that shared experience. So I definitely, Boy Erased, the book and the film, are both certainly things that I would definitely encourage people, if they haven't seen or read it, is to do that as well.
Thanks.
Cheers, Ian. So I'm going to talk about a few different things. I'll do my signposting at the end. But I'm just going to talk briefly about a book that I've read earlier on this year called Identity Crisis, a book by Ben Elton. And I think a lot of the issues that we find with, the stigma that we apply to the LGBTQ plus, people from that background, it's due to ignorance, and it's due to an evolution of mindset from our childhoods, potentially. This book centres around a detective in his 50s who's considered to be a bit of an old wrinkly, who's not really kept up with the times, and it's about how he deals with the murder of one of the other central characters, who is a trans person. And the whole story unfolds around this idea of how we perceive sexuality, how the media perceives sexuality, and it's a really interesting read to look at it from all the different perspectives. And the final outcome is sort of how everybody is capable of gross evil, everybody's capable of love, everybody's capable of good and bad, regardless of our age, our gender, our sexuality. And it's just a really good read. And perhaps if you're of a similar age to me or the lads, it might be worth just having a little read and looking at yourself and your own sort of perspective about your own beliefs, and perhaps how you feel about certain factors of society. And one thing's certain, we shouldn't be stigmatizing, but it's a really good read. So that's one thing I want to signpost people to first and foremost. So I'll pick up now on what was sort of mentioned really when I was talking to Pete earlier on. We were talking to Pete with regards to how he's found the media, working in media for so many years. Has it changed over the years? And he said he thought it was changing, and obviously recent times he feels that we're taking back steps and whatnot. But just to pick up on how the media can have an extremely negative effect on people. When I was about 8 years old, I remember there was an advert on television. It was like a public health broadcast about the AIDS virus, and it scared the life out of me, because within this advert there was tombstones, and on the tombstones just had AIDS emblazoned across it, and it was basically saying, and it was kind of focused around the gay sort of society at the time, and it was sort of demonising people who were gay, and they were the main people sort of spreading the disease, etc., which we know was obviously not right, not fair, and as a young boy at the time, thinking about his own sexuality and where I wanted to go with that and things like that, I just remember being so scared. And I think the media has such a lot to answer for, particularly back in those days. But now, with regards to social media, there's still, as Pete said, the amount of homophobic behaviours that's still going on through social media platforms. It's just sheer cowardice, isn't it? And I'll just, I'll come on to my signposting. I just want to say, in order to have a stable mental health, people need to be allowed to be who they want to be without fear of reprisal, stigma, or hate. And I think that's really important, that we should just let us be who we want to be in life, and nobody should have any sort of opinion on that. We should all be allowed to be who we want to be. So a quick bit of signposting. Obviously, we had Chris from. We're going to have Chris from YPAS coming in after, but I just want to sort of promote the GYRO service there. So the gay youth are out. The phone number for those guys is 0151 707 1025, and the email is gyro@ YPAS.org.uk. So if you wanted to access the services there, that's their details. And then something more national, I've got the Mind Out website, mindout.org.uk, and that deals with all sorts of mental health services for the LGBTQ plus community. And also there's the LGBT Foundation helpline and email. So the email for that is helpline@lgbt.foundation. And then finally, more local to Liverpool, I suppose, there's something called the Liverpool Rainbow Chorus. And this is like a singing group for all people, but it's mainly, it wants to include LGBTQ plus people, and that they can go to St Michael in the City Church on Upper Pitt Street, and there's like a choir that takes place there, and to support people who might be feeling isolated or want to be part of a community that welcomes people from the LGBTQ plus background. So yeah, that's me done.
Top signposting as usual, Dan. And also as well, you know, we plug the Hub of Hope on every single one of our podcasts. But again, go on the Hub of Hope. And again, there's other support groups on there as well for people all across the country. So tap into that. Just going to have a short break. And then after that, we're going to have Chris Porter from YPAS.
You're listening to the Men's Mental Health Podcast, The Man Hug.
Okay, it's this part of the podcast where we help promote a local service related to the theme that we have been speaking about today. So we're really made up that we're joined by Chris Porter, who's the Wellbeing Service Team Lead at YPAS, who are the Young Persons Advisory Service here in Liverpool. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us first a little bit, for anyone who doesn't know, what's YPAS as a service then?
So YPAS is the Young Persons Advisory Service. It's based in Liverpool. It was based in Liverpool City Centre, where we still have our kind of core base, but we have hubs now across the north and south of the city. So it's a mental health and wellbeing charity for children, young people and families. So at YPAS, we work with young people generally from the age of 5 up to 25 years old, and families and parents as well. So pretty much everyone really. And there's lots of different services within YPAS. So broadly speaking, you've got 2 broad services, the wellbeing service and the therapy service, and I work on the wellbeing service.
Brilliant. Okay, so you said it covers a lot of different sort of themes and topics for young people. What types of things could people go to if they needed any support?
So if people need support with any kind of wellbeing or mental health support, we should be able to offer them something. So some common presentations would be anxiety, low mood, depression, but it can also be more significant presentations of self-harm or suicidality. And I'm the LGBTQ plus lead there, so I tend to work more with gender identity and sexual orientation. So it could be anything. It could be need a CV, struggling at school, and we'll try and help them.
Wow, amazing. One of our guests that we had before, Pete Price, he was obviously talking from a historical aspect of his horrendous story of, him coming out and then aversion therapy. To hear that there's these services now for young people, he said, I wish, he got quite emotional, didn't he? He said, I wish there was something like that for my age. So the likes of GYRO then is your LGBTQ plus group, isn't it? So just tell us a little bit about what that is then.
So GYRO's been going for a long time in one form or another. I'm unreliably told since 1976. So if anyone wants to look into that, crack on. Let me know.
Well, actually.
But I've been there for the last 10 years, so I can tell you more about that, I suppose. GYRO is an acronym that means Gay Youth Are Out, but it's much more than that these days. So we work with young people right across gender identity and sexuality spectrums, as a kind of word that you might or might not want to use. So even in the last 10 years, I would say that we've seen a massive increase in gender diverse or transgender young people accessing our services. And still we get a lot of people accessing because they want support with sexuality also. What I would say is that it's not always about like a negative thing as well. Some people want to make friends. Some people want to become more activist as well, and we're here to nurture that. So it's not always coming with a problem, because it's important we don't pathologize LGBT identities and say, oh, it starts with a negative, from a negative point. So we have a group on Tuesdays for secondary school age young people, year 7 to 11. And a group on Thursdays for 16 to 25-year-olds, kind of post-GCSE. So kind of work with 11 to 25-year-olds in terms of groups. And we run a trans or gender diverse youth group as well called the Action Youth, which is slightly different than GYRO and has a bit of a comms element to it, which you can talk about another time maybe or whenever. But yeah, so group work, and we also offer a lot of one-to-one support also. So people can refer in for our one-to-one support if you know a child or young person who wants some support in Liverpool or Merseyside, or they can just walk into one of our youth groups, no referral needed.
Wow, amazing. So that support's pretty much accessible straight away really for anyone who needs it, or as you say, if people want to come and meet new friends and a new social group and get involved in activism and things like that as well. Do you also look at sort of like the calendar of events, things like Pride, and do you engage?
Absolutely, yeah. We get involved in a lot of things. So Pride's a classic one. Quite often we put on our own kind of youth version or youth element to it, because Prides are often kind of adult orientated for different reasons. So we work hard at putting on a kind of safe space for young people. Trans Day of Remembrance is coming up in November. We've got World Mental Health Day and Coming Out Day in October. And there's always something in the calendar, and we like to get involved in it as well. So it's really important for me as the lead that we are actively engaged in a local community, and national and everywhere else that we can, but that we're not just insular and hidden away.
Yeah, and we were talking just before this, weren't we, about how connecting through other agencies and youth services as well across the country and network, and how valuable that is as well for young people as well. So what other sort of links do you have with other services across the city for young people?
So I think there's kind of the mental health element of it, where we want to make sure that any services offering mental health support are kind of clued up in some kind of way with LGBT plus awareness. So part of our offer is also offering kind of training or awareness raising with organisations. Schools is a classic one, and colleges, let's face it, children, young people spend most of the time there. So really they should feel supported there as well. And obviously at home as well, ideally. But in terms of organisations, we do a lot of work with schools. One of our core offers to schools is called the Rainbow Flag Award, which is a whole school approach of LGBT plus inclusion, positive inclusion for schools. So we'll look at teachers, policies, curriculum, pastoral support, and to see how the school can improve their LGBT plus kind of support and visibility.
Amazing. Well, it's probably a little bit of information needed before this, but I went to some Stonewall, the national charity. I went to some of their training about 5 years ago now, and it was all on the theme of young people, LGBTQ plus, and mental health. And I've never come away from anywhere so blown away and horrified by the statistics and the things I was hearing about young people's mental health. And one of the poor things that always stood out was, I think there was this huge survey that they'd done. It was through Oxford University. Only 5% of young people, LGBTQ plus, felt their school was supportive for them during that period. So now we have amazing service like yourselves where you're offering this training, very valuable training to the likes of schools. How are you finding it in 2023 in terms of school support in particular, or college support as well?
So it's mixed for different reasons, I would say. So you're absolutely right. Pretty much all the research shows the same outcomes, is that we took part in research kind of over the last few years called Queer Futures and Queer Futures 2. And it showed exactly that young people felt maybe that they could speak to a youth worker more than they could speak to someone at school. And this has all kind of knock-on effects for people's mental health. If you're super isolated and internalising homophobia or transphobia, etc. What we find with schools is that it's really mixed bag. So some people will be like, oh, religious schools won't have you in. Well, we haven't really found that, to be honest. We found it a mix. And what we know is that if there's a supportive SLT, then it's all right. And also that you need to stand your ground. So as a lot of people will be aware, a lot of the discourse around trans identities and trans young people or trans people in general, it's very negative and heated at the minute. There shouldn't be discourse at all, but that is affecting schools, and schools are a bit like, I don't know if we want to open what is Pandora's box to them to talk about this gender thing or gender identity, because they're afraid of where it will go. And some of them are afraid of and are getting kickback from parents. You know, that is a reality. But the reality is also people forget about like the silent majority, that most people are sound and are okay and just don't write in to say, here, I'm okay with this. Yeah. But the people who write in to say, I hate this, you know, they're a very small minority, but for some reason it carries a disproportionate amount of weighting. Yeah. So we're trying to go in kind of really low level and just raise awareness that it's all right to be affirmative to people as a default position. It's not, you can't turn anyone gay or trans, you know. And I'm sure that you've spoken to people who have experienced kind of the opposite, where people are trying to turn them straight or cisgender, you know, with conversion therapy, for example. That's probably more of a significant issue than, people being able to identify openly as themselves in school.
Yeah. One of the other things I wanted to touch on, well, obviously Merseyside, we're an extremely diverse city and something we're very proud of. And again, when you look at kind of all of the key data, it always says those within LGBTQ plus who are at more risk of the likes of, say, self-harm or suicide or addiction problems tend to be those that are marginalised in society anyway. So is the things with YPAS that you're doing to try and target those sort of specific groups of people who are marginalised, say maybe because of their ethnic background?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think we find this locally, we find it in our organisation, and I think it's the same nationally across the board, which is no excuse. What I would say is what we see in our groups is a largely white, maybe middle class kind of background young people, people who are reasonably well educated, let's say, you know. What we don't get so much is, you know, the scally lads or girls coming in, which we do every now and again. But the problem is they come in, they look around and go, where's me? You know, you don't represent me. And I see it, I hear that. And I think when you go into local communities around Liverpool, you see, what you might assume, maybe wrongly or rightly, there's an LGBT young person, but those young people don't necessarily access city centre provision. So it's up for us as staff and workers and professionals to identify that, isn't it? And be like, what are we going to do about it? So we do try and do some kind of intersectional working, I suppose. So we have networks that we work with people with lived experience or from marginalised backgrounds, queer people of colour and Black people as well, who are happy to come in and speak to our young people, or as a staff network that we can ask, like, how do we be better? And what are the barriers? Because I can assume this and that. I have no lived experience. You know, I'm a white man, a white cisgender man, and I'm well aware of those privileges in different ways. So it is important that we listen, you know, and actively try and do something about it. So don't have all the answers, but we're aware of the issues, you know, and we need to be honest with ourselves and do something about that. So I think part of what we need is more outreach and more like collaborative working with existing groups, to just be like, oh, there's my door, you can walk through it, isn't working. And we need a bit more like active support, I would say.
Oh, it sounds brilliant that, you know, you're reflecting on that all of the time to see what you can do, and you are actively doing it, which is fantastic. Anyone like to ask any other questions?
No, it's just around those things, as you said. It's a diverseness that we actually have, is trying to meet the needs of that diversity. And it's the same across health, full stop. You know, we'd have specific things in specific areas staffed by specific people to meet those needs. And for an organisation such as yourself, that's the challenge, isn't it? Like, try and do those things. So
Absolutely.
total respect what you're doing.
I think, like, we're a charity, so as well, it doesn't really matter these days. Nobody's got money, for anything, but like, you've got to like think about really getting, how do we get the value for what we're using money for and resource as well, and how does it meet the needs? Because usually marginalized people are the first ones to drop off the radar in some kind of way and not have their needs met. It's about getting the low-hanging fruit for some people, which isn't good. So we need to be actively doing something about that. And the other thing that we like to talk about in our youth groups and in our work is intersectionality and regarding mental health as well. For example, if you are a Black, trans, gay person who's a wheelchair user, you could have compounding, marginalized, discriminatory things going on in your life, which then will have a knock-on effect on your mental health and well-being. So, any one or two of those combinations or whatever can significantly increase, risk of poor outcomes in terms of mental health or health, or, across the board. So we need to be mindful of that, don't we? When we're not seeing people, it's like, who's supporting, what's going on here?
Brilliant. Such a valuable point.
Chris, can I just ask you, what are you from the service, and you've been in 10 years, what's the thing you're most proud of in terms of what you've done and the service that you've been providing? What's the thing for you that you just think, That's
a good question. I think, I don't know if it's got anything to do with me, but we see the increase in like engagement of young people go up year on year. So apart from obviously like lockdown years, which I was kind of worried about, that whole stay at home thing, and some people weren't safe at home. But anyway, we're getting about 50 young people access a week in terms of just our group work. And we know there's a demand for it. And a lot of it is with the older ones, 16 to 25-year-olds. And I'm just really like proud of that we have created a space that young people want to access, I suppose. That's the thing that I'm most proud of. I feel like it's worthwhile, when young people turn up and then they turn up again, because they don't have to. And they're not on a subscription, like when you join a gym, you feel forced to go because you paid for it. They don't have to. So they show up and I'm like, happy days. They must like something about it.
I think that key word, safe space, every person we've had on the podcast who runs services, they all always go back to that. And I think it's just so important, isn't it, to have an environment where people feel openly supported, able to talk, be able to be themselves. That's a massive achievement,
Thanks very much. Yeah, I think that's it. You go to the old Maslow hierarchy of needs, and we know that safety is key, don't we? So safe space, sometimes I roll when you say safe space, but actually the actual importance of that is like, it's so underestimated, I think, and that's just your foundations. You need to be standing on a safe space to ground yourself a little bit and then get it on with your life, hopefully.
Yeah, definitely. So the big selling point for yourself, how do people access it? If everyone's listening and they feel that they could get any of the benefit from all the things we've spoke about, how would they access?
So they can access, they can walk into any one of our hubs and ask for support. What I would say is our LGBTQ plus support is delivered from our city centre hub mainly. So by the Adelphi Hotel in town, and that's where we will deliver our one-to-one support, confidential one-to-one support, and group work as well, and other things as well. So if they just walk in, they can ask to speak to someone. Appointments are needed for the kind of one-to-one support really, but you can go on our website as well, www.ypas.org.uk, and all the referral pathways are there, phone numbers and emails and stuff.
Amazing. Well, you're doing a fantastic job, and it's nice to have someone with a nice Northern Irish accent on the podcast as well, isn't it, for once?
What do you mean for once?
You can actually tell what you're saying.
We don't need subtitles.
Dean, I know where you live.
This is my posh voice, whenever I go back home, people are like,
you got an English accent.
Yeah, exactly.
I get that.
Don't win.
So once again, thanks so much again for coming on. It's amazing what you're doing. And for anyone out there, as Chris just said, it's YPAS.org.uk.
Thank you very much.
If you or anybody else you know is struggling with their mental health, visit hubofhope.co.uk or download the app today and find local and national mental health support.
Please make sure that you follow us on Twitter. It's @TheManHub. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next month.